Outside of the memes, if 2025 actually changed League forever, if there is one thing that actually became awesome, it's the lore. Be it because of the cinematics, the new champions, or all the comics, the story simply keeps going. And yesterday we got another big piece that dove into a topic a lot of people like, the Darkin. And so, let's dive into the new comic that is dedicated to the Shrine Maiden. This comic begins by following the previous one. It's the part where Xinjiao talked to Kennen. Specifically, they stopped at the Shrine of the Maiden and they talked about her tale. And this comic starts by cleverly using the quote from that previous scene, so that you all know that we are diving into her story. Which of course, as far as we know, is an Ionian myth. Which is why we can already see all the scrolls and the parchments, which is where the myths are written. And since they are related to spirits and potentially demons, that's why it may slightly resemble the Noxian demonic compendium. Anyway, despite this being a myth, all legends are based in truth. And so here we are actually getting canonical story of Runeterra. And so first it mentions that a long time ago, the Kanmei spirits guarded the First Lands. Of course, we know that the First Lands are an ancient name for Ionia, and Kanmei should be good demons. As far as we know, they should be the same family as demons, but they are the good ones, so for simplicity, let's call them spirits. And here on the left side you can see Ionia in general, though specifically it could be Koshin, since that is where all of these stories are taking place now. And on the right side we can see the Temple of the Shrine Maiden, more on that one later. The story then mentions that a long time ago, mortals lived in peace with the Kanmei spirits. This is a really cool nod to Shen's entire story. He is the Eye of Twilight, which is the title of someone who kills both humans and spirits should they harm each other. I mean, his job is to preserve equilibrium. And that is again because mortals and spirits should live in harmony. And so in this comic we can see a nod to what could be potentially the origin of Shen's story. But that's more like an Easter egg here. More importantly, here we can see mortals placing down offerings. They are placing them down for a Kanmei spirit who could be related to Pra, a Darkin, which we know is in Ionia, whose weapon is a fan. So perhaps the fans of this spirit eventually turn into a Darkin weapon? Or is it possible that this thing with the fans is indeed the Darkin known as Pra? Slight foreshadowing. But remember, nothing confirmed. More importantly, next we can see that even the Kanmei spirits were not perfect. They could see themselves above the rest, and perhaps they could prey on the mortal beings. So while the comic mentions pride, desire and vengeance, all of which should be the wicked behavior of humanity, remember that these are also emotions that drive demons in general. And so the comic is trying to tease something which we've known from the previous Spirit Blossom story. It's the fact that the spirits separated into the Kanmei, which again are the good spirits, you can see these on the left side, and the Akana, or the demons, which are on the right side. However, that is not exactly what's really happening here, and that's where the dark twist comes in. You see, next the story mentions that some of these dark spirits gathered followers. It was mortal worshippers who were promised power for their servitude. And so, Ionia suffered through a new age. It was times when the mortals followed the dark spirits and they fought each other. Which is where the Shrine Maiden comes in. This maiden journeyed to her temple where she communed with the patron Kanmei spirit of her shrine. She asked the spirit for help against the dark beings that brought war to Ionia. But at first, the spirit didn't care. After all, there were countless wars that were started by mortals, and eventually harmony always returned. But the maiden then urged that these dark beings call themselves the Kanmei, even though they are not. This piqued the spirit's interest. And after learning that these beings gathered worshippers and sent them forth to destroy the land, the spirit suspiciously knew what's going on. And so, ironically, having the Shrine Maiden as his own follower, the spirit would help. They would merge with the Shrine Maiden, and through her body, they would fight for their homeland. And so they fought against the mortals who lost their way to the dark spirits, and thus became age known as the War of the False Kanmei, which is the dark twist I teased before. Because you see, the entire time, the dark spirits were not demons, they were not Akana, which is exactly what the Spirit Blossom story teased before. Instead, the false Kanmei, which the mortals believed were spirits, were actually the Darkin. And so, quite a long story short, the Darkin were originally the ascended warriors of the Shuriman Empire. They got their strength from the celestial powers that were granted to them by the Sun Disk. But over time, as they were sent into more and more battles, eventually they fought against the Void, which slightly broke their sanity. After this, when their Emperor Azir died, the Ascended kinda lost their purpose. This was followed by all of them fighting each other because they wanted to be the next leader. They also all got tainted by blood magic, which was invented by another one of these Ascended. And so soon, instead of Ascended, they started being called Darkin. And their battles became the Darkin War. The key point is, these battles took place all over the world, which means the Darkin were everywhere. This included Ionia, except here, instead of the Darkin War, it was the War of the False Kanmei. This also means that if you look here into the background, you can see the Darkin who were present in Ionia. But eventually, the Maiden and her spirit managed to purge them all from Ionia, after which we learn how they were able to achieve this. It was all because the patron spirit was a Darkin himself. This is why he knew what was going on, and this is why he knew how to fight them. Which is when you might wonder, well, if this spirit is also a Darkin, why does it look more celestial? In truth, we don't really know. But in the past, there were some Darkin who allied with the celestial aspects and they helped them purge the Darkin from Runeterra. Specifically in the story called Twilight of the Gods. There was a Darkin who allied with the aspect of Twilight, and they helped them use their celestial powers to seal the Darkin inside their weapons. But all of that happened in Shurima. But since the Darkin were scattered all across the world, the aspect of Twilight teased that they would scatter around and hunt them all down. And so since some of the Darkin, such as Varus, were in Ionia, who knows, maybe the patron is someone who also allied with Twilight and they help them seal the Darkin here. In other words, maybe they are responsible for sealing Varus. In fact, if you go back to the previous panel and you have a look at the Darkin, you can see that one of them has a bow, which means this could be the original Varus. What's even cooler is that you can notice that the other one has a scythe. So it is possible that it could be the original Rast, even though he doesn't have the classic horns. But that could be because, remember, the original Darkin looked different. The way we see them now is what they look like after a mortal picked up their body and they took it over. Which means it is more like a hybrid of a mortal body and the Darkin body. So in reality, we don't really know what the Darkin originally looked like. As far as we know, the only one that stays consistent is Aatrox. Because Aatrox is so powerful that when someone picks up his blade, he just totally dominates their body and takes on his original look. Though with that said, also keep in mind that we don't really know where Rast is from. Sure, Kain wields him now and he is Ionian, but the Darkin Scythe was originally found in Noxus. There is the likelihood that it was brought here from Ionia, but just keep in mind that unless I totally forgot, we don't really know where Rast is from. Anyway, after sealing all the Darkin away, the patron saw himself as an enemy to mortals, and so he decided to exile himself into the spirit realm. Now, spirit magic is not exactly something the Darkin would be known for, but spirit magic in general is vastly present in Ionia. So specifically here, sure, that would be possible. However, the Shrine Maiden would stay devoted, and as the patron exiled himself, she would go with him. And so here, we can see the entire temple, together with a piece of the Ionian land, being banished into the spirit realm. How do we know this is what happened? Well, it was kinda teased in the dev video. There we got a teaser of the next cinematic, and we could see the temple kinda pop back into existence. Which means the Shrine Maiden should be using the same kind of magic as Aphelios and Elune. Because on Mount Targon, Elune entered a Lunari temple and she also vanished into the spirit realm. Which means none of this is made up and it all makes sense in the canonical setting. And that is where the story ends for now. The next part of the story should be likely a cinematic, and I'm going to assume that it is gonna focus on the reappearance of the temple, which is where we should tackle an important question. Is this Shrine Maiden who was banished thousands of years ago the same Yunara we are getting as a champion? Well, we don't really know, but I sure hope so. It would be an excellent way to turn a skin for a champion into another canonical form of the champion. Specifically, it would be really cool to do so, since her story seems to be heavily tied to the Darkin. Though it is also possible that Riot turns Yunara into a champion that simply follows the path of the original Maiden. That is yet to be revealed, because this is pretty much where the story ends. So overall, another amazing addition to League's lore. I like how the entire theme of the Darkin keeps going back, because now it really seems like there's gonna be some kind of a Darkin finale. And again, sure, maybe 2025 hasn't changed League altogether forever, but it is making the story feel more alive. And with the constant pace of new stories and cinematics, it's kinda hard to look back at that one cinematic. What even happened back then?